We were hunters and foragers. The frontier was everywhere. We were bounded only by the earth and the ocean and the sky. The open road still softly calls. Our little terraqueous globe is the madhouse of those 100,000 millions of worlds. We who cannot even put our own planetary home in order, riven with rivalries and hatreds, are we to venture out into space? By the time we're ready to settle even the nearest other planetary systems, we will have changed. The simple passage of so many generations will have changed us. Necessity will have changed us. We're an adaptable species. It will not be we who reach Alpha Centauri and the other nearby stars. It will be a species very like us, but with more of our strengths and fewer of our weaknesses. More confident, far-seeing, capable, and prudent. For all our failings, despite our limitations and fallibilities, we humans are capable of greatness. What new wonders, undreamt of in our time, will we have wrought in another generation, and another? How far will our nomadic species have wandered by the end of the next century, and the next millennium? Our remote descendants, safely arrayed on many worlds through the solar system and beyond, will be unified by their common heritage, by their regard for their home planet, and by the knowledge that whatever other life may be, the only humans in all the universe come from Earth. They will gaze up and strain to find the blue dot in their skies. They will marvel at how vulnerable the repository of all our potential once was, how perilous our infancy, how humble our beginnings, how many rivers we had to cross before we found our way.
Wouldn't it be lovely to make contact with another civilization that has arisen and evolved independently? Well, one thing you'd have to do first is to be sure you can understand the message. Why should we expect that beings that are very different, evolved in a different place, different period of time for their evolution, should be able to send us a message that we can understand? And the reason I think that's likely is that they live in the same universe as we. They must deal with the same laws of physics and chemistry and astronomy as we. To test the idea that a signal could be understood, we did a little experiment. We can only use human beings. It's too bad. I wish we could use some other intelligent beings to make such an experiment, but we're restricted to people. They're the only ones we know about. And so what we did was to devise a complicated message, which you can see here, of zeros and ones. The 0 and 1 might be a long and a short radio beep, you know, beep, 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 beep. Or it might be two frequencies, beep, 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 beep. Might be many things, but it's a language of two letters. And you can see there's an enormous number of zeros and ones, in fact, 27,000 and something of them here. You can't tell just by looking at it, oh my goodness, I see what this is. You have to think about it. Now the key to this is that the total number of zeros and ones is 31 times 31 times 31. 31 cubed. And it suggests that it's a pictorial message in 3 dimensions. And if we were to write it in a sequence of 31 symbols, then go to the next line, then you see it starts getting a remarkable regularity. And so what we did is to give this message, not made simple in that way, to some graduate students of mine at Cornell University. They were told nothing about what was in it, how to decode it, and their job was to figure out what it said. And here they are describing the process they went through to figure out what the message was about. These are all graduate students of mine who are reasonably clever. But none of them work on this particular problem.
Well, we gathered together in the Mars room and stared at it and cursed volubly at length. Kathy noticed that 31 divided into 29,791. And it was determined that the remainder, 961, was 31 squared, which left us with a 31 by 31 by 31 sequence. And then we sat together, 6 of us, for 4 hours, transcribing zeros and ones, screaming and shouting from one office to the next, and complaining about the typographical errors until we could get the sequence, which is shown in frames there.
They were making good progress. They found some errors in the transcription of this that the BBC had made, in fact, but they figured out how to get around that.
It was not necessarily a three-dimensional model at first. It could have been a movie, because what we see, what eventually turned out to be the corner markers of the cube and the lines which drew the pattern of the cube could have been just frame markers for a movie or a slideshow. It could have been separate frames. And it was only when we had drawn them out and looked at them that it became very uncertain whether it was anything like that.
Since it was a dull movie, you figured it was really a three-dimensional.
That was about the size of it.
So here we have some plexiglass things. So a 1 will be represented by a black square and a 0 by a transparent square. Here's a whole sequence of transparent squares. That is, this would represent a sequence of zeros. Now, building up as the message requires, first space is a 1, which is black. Second space, another 1, which is black. Third space, other 1, which is black. And in fact, it's black 1s all the way across the top line. So the top line there is a sequence of black 1s. Next line begins with a black 1, but then there's a sequence of zeros represented by the transparent markers, and then a 1 at the end. Now we have the similar pattern building up. Black edge, transparent interior, which goes for a number of lines further. Now the next line is different. It starts out with a 1, has a sequence of zeros, and then there are 3 1s in the middle, then the same sequence of zeros, and then a 1. So here is the black 1 at the periphery. Then here are the zeros. Next are the 3 black 1s, and then there will be zeros and a black 1 there. And the remainder of this frame fills in like this. So we now see the picture is a black border and a kind of Maltese cross in the middle, and everything else blank. There are many other layers, and when we build them all up, we result in a pattern, which we will shortly see, and that is the answer. We can tell this is the right answer because of how regular the geometry is. We couldn't have gotten that by accident. So here is, in 3 dimensions, what the resulting model is like. Now let's see what the graduate students have to say about their interpretation of this funny-looking message.
Well, the first thing that came out of our analysis of that object was that in profile it was strongly reminiscent of Mickey Mouse. And in fact, it's still not clear whether that's the case or not. And although we know that you have a sense of humor, Mickey Mouse was not our idea of a joke, so it had to be something else.
The only thing it really looked like was a molecular orbital type drawing of a molecule. And the first one that came to my mind was formaldehyde.
And Kathy is in fact right. This was intended to be a formaldehyde molecule, although it does look a little bit like Mickey Mouse, in which there's a carbon atom, 2 hydrogens, and an oxygen. Now, what could the significance of that be? Why go to all this trouble to simply say formaldehyde? And the answer is that formaldehyde has a radio frequency attached to it. And what all of this trouble is about is the message is saying, don't listen on this station. This isn't the station that's interesting. Listen on the formaldehyde station, and that's where the Encyclopedia Galactica will be. So as soon as we get that message, quick, we turn the frequency of our radio telescope to the formaldehyde frequency, continue to look at the same star we're looking at, and then hopefully get such a message. That's the general kind of idea. Notice that if we made a serious such search and succeeded, the results would be inestimable. We will have ended the isolation of mankind from the rest of the universe forever. If we made a serious search and failed, we would have determined something of the uniqueness, fragility, preciousness of human beings. And it seems to me either way we win.
One philosopher asserted that he knew the whole secret. He surveyed the 2 celestial strangers from top to toe, and maintained to their faces that their persons, their worlds, their suns and their stars were created solely for the use of man. At this assertion, our 2 travelers let themselves fall against each other, seized with a fit of inextinguishable laughter. That's from Voltaire's Micromegas in 1752. In the 17th century, there was still some hope that even if the Earth was not the center of the universe, it might be the only world. But Galileo's telescope revealed that, quote, the moon certainly does not possess a smooth and polished surface, close quote, and that other worlds might look just like the face of the Earth itself. The moon and the planets showed unmistakably that they had as much claim to being worlds as the Earth does, with mountains, craters, atmospheres, polar ice caps, clouds, and, in the case of Saturn, a dazzling, unheard-of set of circumferential rings. After millennia of philosophical debate, the issue was settled decisively in favor of what was called the plurality of worlds. They might be profoundly different from our planet. None of them might be as congenial for life, but the Earth was hardly the only one. This was the next in the series of great demotions, down-lifting experiences, demonstrations of our apparent insignificance, wounds that science has, in its search for Galileo's facts, delivered to human pride. Well, some hoped, even if the Earth isn't at the center of the universe, the Sun is. The Sun is our Sun. So the Earth is approximately at the center of the universe. Perhaps some of our pride could in this way be salvaged. But by the 19th century, observational astronomy had made it clear that the Sun is but one lonely star in a great self-gravitating assemblage of suns called the Milky Way galaxy. Far from being at the center of the galaxy, our Sun, with its entourage of dim and tiny planets, lies in an undistinguished sector of an obscure spiral arm. We are 30,000 light years from the center. Well, our Milky Way is the only galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy is in fact one of billions, perhaps hundreds of billions, of galaxies notable neither in mass, nor in brightness, nor in how its stars are configured and arrayed. Some modern deep sky photographs show more galaxies beyond the Milky Way than stars within the Milky Way. Every one of them is an island universe containing perhaps 100 billion suns. Such an image is a profound sermon on humility. The long-standing view, as summarized by the philosopher Immanuel Kant, that without man, the whole of creation would be a mere wilderness, a thing in vain, and have no final end, is revealed to be self-indulgent folly. A principle of mediocrity seems to apply to all our circumstances. We would not have known beforehand that the evidence would be so repeatedly and thoroughly incompatible with the proposition that human beings are at center stage in the universe. But most of the debates have now been settled decisively in favor of a position that, however painful, can be encapsulated in a single sentence. We have not been given the lead in the cosmic drama. Perhaps someone else has. Perhaps no one else has. In either case, we have good reason for humility.
Carl and Deanne, you two strike me as a couple of true believers who are no more willing to question the theory that you base your beliefs on than were the ministers of the 19th century whom you so roundly criticize as being closed-minded. I'd like to raise a couple of questions and see how you respond.
Sure, fire away.
Regarding this theory. Number one, how do you explain the switch from asexual reproduction to sexual reproduction?
Well, first off, let me say that in no way challenges the validity of biological evolution, whether we're able or unable to explain the fact that many species, by no means all, reproduce sexually today. The Darwinian concept of evolution and natural selection is profoundly verified, not just by the fossil record.
Well, where are the fossils in transition,
Excuse me. Not just by the clear experience of artificial selection, but by the record in the nucleic acids, which is obtained by DNA sequencing, in which we can see the similarities and differences of organisms and trace their evolutionary past,
in other words, you've got this
history.
Theory with a gaping hole in it.
There's no gaping.
It doesn't cause you to question the theory.
There's no gaping holes. You're talking about the absence of intermediate forms in the fossil record.
That was one problem.
The fossil record. Well, let's talk about each thing that you have problems with if there's time. Well, just a minute. You raise one, and then when I'm about to answer it, you rush off to the next. Let's do them one at a time. The fossil record is necessarily incomplete because of the processes of erosion, but particularly, it seems to me...
And all the fossils in transition got picked off.
Sir, nobody said all the fossils. You're going to lots of intermediate forms.
You're going to have to put aside your creationist primer for a moment and either listen to the answers that you raised.
Position.
Well, sir, I will thank you for the call, but I think it would be unproductive to continue because our caller, I fear, is too ready to do battle rather than to listen. He rather reminds me of Pontius Pilate. He asks what is truth, but does not stay for the answer.
Let me at least respond to one of the caller's concerns. Consider artificial selection. I mean, There is something intrinsically implausible about evolution, particularly if you think that the world is only a few thousand years old, as the biblical chronology would have it. Then the idea of one species flowing into another is absurd. We never see that in our everyday life, we are told. But consider artificial selection. Consider, for example, the variety of dogs on the planet. We have dogs ranging from Chihuahuas to Great Danes. We have dogs specialized for herding sheep, for going into holes, for catching birds that are shot down, for taking care of the babies, for guarding the house. Tremendous variety of dogs on the planet.
And in fact, they are man-made dogs in a way.
Exactly. Where did they come from? We, humans, made them by controlling which dog shall mate with which. We like the characteristics of Rover. We like the characteristics of Spot. We now introduce Rover and Spot to each other so that we can have the products of their progeny. Other dogs with characteristics we don't like, who are unpleasant to us, we do not encourage their reproduction of. And in the short period of 8,000 or 10,000 years, we produce this immense variety of dogs. Now, compare that with 4 billion years of biological evolution, not artificial selection, but natural selection, which goes into not just the overall characteristics and personalities of the dogs, but into the biochemistry, into the internal organs, selecting what works a little bit better, just the faintest bit, in the competition of organisms. And then it is clear that the beauty and diversity of life on Earth can emerge. But if you don't buy 4 billion years, you don't buy evolution.
The meaningless absurdity of life, wrote Leo Tolstoy, is the only incontestable knowledge accessible to man. Close quote. Our time is burdened under the cumulative weight of successive debunkings of our conceits. We're Johnny-come-latelys. We live in the cosmic boondocks. We emerged from microbes and muck. Apes are our cousins. Our thoughts and feelings are not fully under our own control. There may be much smarter and very different beings elsewhere, and on top of all this, we're making a mess of our planet and becoming a danger to ourselves. The trapdoor beneath our feet swings open. We find ourselves in bottomless free fall. We are lost in a great darkness, and there's no one to send out a search party. Given so harsh a reality, of course we're tempted to shut our eyes and pretend that we're safe and snug at home, that the fall is only a bad dream. We lack consensus about our place in the universe. There is no generally agreed upon long-term vision of the goal of our species, other than, perhaps, simple survival. Especially when times are hard, we become desperate for encouragement, unreceptive to the litany of great emotions and dashed hopes, and much more willing to hear that we're special, never mind if the evidence is paper-thin. If it takes a little myth and ritual to get us through a night that seems endless, who among us cannot sympathize and understand? But if our objective is deep knowledge rather than shallow reassurance, the gains from this new perspective far outweigh the losses. Once we overcome our fear of being tiny, we find ourselves on the threshold of a vast and awesome universe that utterly dwarfs, in time, in space, and in potential, the tidy anthropocentric proscenium of our ancestors. We gaze across billions of light-years of space to view the universe shortly after the Big Bang and plumb the fine structure of matter. We peer down into the core of our planet and the blazing interior of our star. We read the genetic language in which is written the diverse skills and propensities of every being on earth. We uncover hidden chapters in the record of our own origins, and with some anguish, better understand our nature and prospects. We invent and refine agriculture, without which almost all of us would starve to death. We create medicines and vaccines that save the lives of billions. We communicate at the speed of light and whip around the earth in an hour and a half. We have sent dozens of ships to more than 70 worlds and 4 spacecraft to the stars. We are right to rejoice in our accomplishments, to be proud that our species has been able to see so far, and to judge our merit, in part, by the very science that has so deflated our pretensions. To our ancestors, there was much in nature to be afraid of: lightning, storms, earthquakes, volcanoes, plagues, drought, long winters. Religions arose in part as attempts to propitiate and control, if not much to understand, the disorderly aspect of nature. The scientific revolution permitted us to glimpse an underlying, ordered universe in which there was a literal harmony of the worlds. That's Johannes Kepler's phrase. If we understand nature, there is a prospect of controlling it, or at least mitigating the harm it may bring. In this sense, science brought hope. Most of the great deprovincializing debates were entered into with no thought for their practical implications. Passionate and curious humans wish to understand their actual circumstances, how unique or pedestrian they in their world are, their ultimate origins and destinies, how the universe works. Surprisingly, some of these debates have yielded the most profound practical benefits. The very method of mathematical reasoning that Isaac Newton introduced to explain the motion of the planets around the sun has led to most of the technology of our modern world. The Industrial Revolution, for all its shortcomings, is still the global model of how an agricultural nation can emerge from poverty. These debates have bread and butter consequences. It might have been otherwise. It might have been that the balance lay elsewhere, that humans by and large did not want to know about a disquieting universe, that we were unwilling to permit challenges to the prevailing wisdom. Despite determined resistance in every age, it is very much to our credit that we have allowed ourselves to follow the evidence, to draw conclusions that at first seemed daunting. A universe so much larger and older that our personal and historical experience is dwarfed and humbled. A universe in which every day suns are born and worlds obliterated. A universe in which humanity, newly arrived, clings to an obscure clod of matter. How much more satisfying had we been placed in a garden custom-made for us, its other occupants put there for us to use as we saw fit. There is a celebrated story in the Western tradition like this, except that not quite everything was there for us. There was one particular tree of which we were not to partake, a tree of knowledge. Knowledge and understanding and wisdom were forbidden to us in this story. We were to be kept ignorant. But we couldn't help ourselves. We were starving for knowledge, created hungry, you might say. This was the origin of all our troubles. In particular, it's why we no longer live in a garden. We found out too much. So long as we were incurious and obedient, I imagine, we could console ourselves with our importance and centrality, and tell ourselves that we were the reason the universe was made. As we began to indulge our curiosity, though, to explore, to learn how the universe really is, we expelled ourselves from Eden. Angels with a flaming sword were set as sentries at the gates of paradise to bar our return. The gardeners became exiles and wanderers. Occasionally we mourn that lost world, but that, it seems to me, is maudlin and sentimental. We could not happily have remained ignorant forever. There is in this universe much of what seems to be design. Every time we come upon it, we breathe a sigh of relief. We're forever hoping to find, or at least to safely deduce, a designer. But instead we repeatedly discover that natural processes, collisional selection of worlds, say, or natural selection of gene pools, or even the convection pattern in a pot of boiling water, can extract order out of chaos and deceive us into deducing purpose where there is none. In everyday life, we often sense, in the bedrooms of teenagers or in national politics, that chaos is natural and order imposed from above. While there are deeper regularities in the universe than the simple circumstances we generally describe as orderly, all that order, simple and complex, seems to derive from laws of nature established at the Big Bang, or maybe earlier, rather than as a consequence of belated intervention by an imperfect deity. God is to be found in the details, is the famous dictum of the German scholar Abby Warburg. But amid much elegance and precision, the details of life in the universe also exhibit haphazard, jury-rigged arrangements and much poor planning. What shall we make of this? An edifice abandoned early in construction by the architect? The evidence so far at least, and laws of nature aside, does not require a designer. Maybe there's one hiding, maddeningly unwilling to be revealed. Sometimes it seems a very slender hope. The significance of our lives and our fragile planet is then determined only by our own wisdom and courage. We are the custodians of life's meaning. We long for a parent to care for us, to forgive us our errors, to save us from our childish mistakes. But knowledge is preferable to ignorance. Better by far to embrace the hard truth than a reassuring fable. If we crave some cosmic purpose, then let us find ourselves a worthy goal. See that star? You mean the bright red one? His daughter asks in return. Yes, it might not be there anymore. It might be gone by now. Exploded or something. Its light is still crossing space, just reaching our eyes now. But we don't see it as it is. We see it as it was. Many people experience a stirring sense of wonder when they first confront this simple truth. Why? Why should it be so compelling? The immense distances to the stars and the galaxies mean that we see everything in space in the past. Some as they were before the Earth came to be. Telescopes are time machines. Long ago, when an early galaxy began to pour light out into the surrounding darkness, no witness could have known that billions of years later, some remote clumps of rock and metal, ice and organic molecules, would fall together to make a place called Earth, or that life would arise and thinking beings evolve who would one day capture a little of that galactic light and try to puzzle out what had sent it on its way. We can recognize here a shortcoming, in some circumstances serious, in our ability to understand the world. Characteristically, willy-nilly, we seem compelled to project our own nature onto nature. Man, in his arrogance, thinks himself a great work, worthy of the interposition of a deity. Darwin wrote telegraphically in his notebook, more humble, and I think truer, to consider him created from animals. We're Johnny-come-latelys. We live in the cosmic boondocks. We emerged from microbes and muck. Apes are our cousins. Our thoughts and feelings are not fully under our own control. There may be much smarter and very different beings elsewhere, and on top of all this, we're making a mess of our planet and becoming a danger to ourselves. The trapdoor beneath our feet swings open. We find ourselves in bottomless free fall. We are lost in a great darkness, and there's no one to send out a search party. Given so harsh a reality, of course we're tempted to shut our eyes and pretend that we're safe and snug at home, that the fall is only a bad dream. If it takes a little myth and ritual to get us through a night that seems endless, who among us cannot sympathize and understand? We long to be here for a purpose, even though, despite much self-deception, none is evident. The significance of our lives and our fragile planet is then determined only by our own wisdom and courage. We are the custodians of life's meaning. We long for a parent to care for us, to forgive us our errors, to save us from our childish mistakes. But knowledge is preferable to ignorance. Better by far to embrace the hard truth than a reassuring fable. Modern science has been a voyage into the unknown, with a lesson in humility waiting at every stop. Our common sense intuitions can be mistaken. Our preferences don't count. We do not live in a privileged reference frame. If we crave some cosmic purpose, then let us find ourselves a worthy goal.